This is an apartheid system that's there and apparently in this country in which, that which they are fighting against.
One specific category of rape victims, of women who are rape victims, which are the women asylum seekers. What can you tell us about this category, and how do you help them deal with the barriers which are, I'm guessing, a lot higher than for the woman who is national?
Historically, we've always campaigned for women seeking asylum from rape and other torture, together with Women Against Rape and as autonomous organizations of women of color. So this is a fight and a struggle which crosses all classes and all sectors of women. And from our point of view, the women who are seeking asylum suffer all the prejudices, all the discrimination that you've heard described, happening to other rape survivors. But of course, there's the additional and much more terrifying prospect of being detained and deported at the end of a process of an immigration process, which is quite literally designed to keep people out. It's designed to stop people getting safety and protection, and it's particularly impactful on women who are traumatized by rape and by other forms of torture. So the systemic racism that's built into the immigration process combines with the Home Office officials who you're going to come up against and be interviewed for your asylum claim to fundamentally dismiss the claim without without bothering to find out what's at the heart of it, even though there are guidelines, just as there are, just as Nicola explained, there are procedures and processes, they're ignored. And more than that, every single avenue that you need, for example, good lawyer, legal aid, all those resources have been axed over the years. I mean, it is far worse now to try to navigate the asylum process than it used to be. And how you can be refused is very straightforward for them. We just don't believe you. And that's particularly a bitter battle for rape survivors. We just don't believe it happened. And then there's an end of it, because how do you prove it? And that's true on anything. The governments can say any lie, and how do you prove that they're wrong? So that's what women are up against. And it's really a question of not just the hostile environment. You actually have to have extraordinary survival skills, determination, and resilience to come to this country. And very few really do come. When we look at the whole situation for refugees across the world, 80% are women and children, and it's a very small number that reach these shores. So, WAR has always been a part of supporting women's struggles. That anti-rape movement has always extended to those who don't have immigration status, or who are fighting for the right to be here. And it's, we've exposed the brutal treatment that survivors face. We've acknowledged, that we've got a fight on not only with the authorities, but also with some of the NGOs, who set themselves up to support asylum seekers, but in fact have often collaborated with the government in introducing legislation, even dreaming it up in some cases. I mean, a practical example is the Refugee Council, who, by its very name, you would think was supporting refugees. But they took on to administer the National Asylum and Support System back in the late 90s, early 2000s, with the Labour government. And we had women coming to our centre who got eviction notices saying that their accommodation had been terminated, and the letter heading was the Refugee Council. And we also had two women who had been raped in one of the towers that that Refugee Council were using to house people. Really, horrendous mixed accommodation. And the Refugee Council ignored the rape, right? And then as by their own security guards that they'd employed. So there've been a lot of things that we've been able to uncover and support as struggles, starting with what women's demands have been in order to change their situation. We have examples which, I could go on for hours with the examples, but that I think the most important thing is that with the campaign being fundamentally spearheaded by the women asylum seekers themselves, rape is now acknowledged as grounds for asylum, to make an asylum claim. And that was won by a precedent ruling back in 1999, where a woman that we'd supported was unable to speak about what she'd been through. So consequently, the Home Office just denied, just said, well, that never happened to you, or downgraded it to be a little bit of slapping about by soldiers, which she actually described as bad treatment. She couldn't say the word rape, and often women don't know the word rape, if they've come from other countries where English is not their first language. So the path-breaking precedent was one that a woman is unable but not unwilling to speak about the torture that she's been through. But having won that did not lead to women getting their their refugee status. It's been a battle ever since, and it always will be a battle, because that's the Home Office start from exactly the same situation that Cressida Dick told her police officers to start from. Don't believe women, they're lying. They're lying to get asylum in this country. So that's been that's been the situation. But when you're traumatized and you can't speak, and the Lifeline is an organization like Women Against Rape, or the other groups that come under our coalition that we have now called Global Women Against Deportation, then there's a support system, there's a grassroots support that enables women to speak out. We help women to speak to the media. We make sure that what has happened to them does not remain hidden behind closed doors. A good example of that is really the whole movement inside of detention centres, because the public call now to close down detention centres was not around in the early 200s, and women women who were inside Yarswood Detention Centre went on hunger strike. Ugandan women and Zimbabwean women, if you like, a handful of women protested the horrendous treatment they were suffering inside the detention centres, and we enabled them to speak out. And that, of course, once people hear what is truly going on inside a place that is very hidden and in the middle of the countryside where nobody knows what's going on, once that happens, we were able to somewhat begin to change public opinion on seeing who asylum seekers are, what they've gone through, and why they've come to Britain for safety and protection. We always felt that was one way of, really building up widespread support. But it began with the women themselves as the central protagonists in that fight and in that struggle. And it's now resulted in, a kind of universal call, if you like, certainly in Britain and beyond, for detention centres to be closed down, for them not to exist, and for people to be, treated compassionately, those who have fled. So that, but again, as I say, you'd think it was the activists who won that struggle, but we say no, it's the women at the centre of those fights. And even the men who were in detention in Harmondsworth acknowledged that it was the women in Yarswood who had led the fight with their hunger strikes. There's been at least 8 hunger strikes, and now very few people detained, although they're starting to do it again in Yarswood. But the big fight is to get your status and to get regularized. And if you can get your foot onto that ladder, then again, we come back to the money. I mean, people who are seeking asylum, they get £37 a week to survive on. Nobody can survive on that amount of money. And if you're a mother with children, you may get a little bit more. But some women, for example, we did a survey in our in the All African Women's Group, which is part of the Global Women Against Deportation Coalition, and found that 50% were living on absolutely nothing, and 60% who were living on the National Asylum Support System benefit of 37% were officially destitute. That is an officially destitute line of money to live on. You know, so they're at risk constantly of dispersal out of London, away from our support networks. They're at risk of being put into detention and deported. You know, and this is an apartheid system that's there and apparently in this country, in which, you know, which they are fighting against. And of course, in the middle of a pandemic, that's a horrendous situation to be in. You know, it was bad before the pandemic, but it's so much worse now. And also we've had a number of successes. In fact, over the period of time, we've got hundreds of women out of detention. We've stopped a number of really violent deportations. We've been able to give women a voice to speak out, including about the rape and sexual abuse inside the detention centres, you know, which again was something that was very hidden until the women spoke out about it. I might have to stop there, because I know I'm conscious that we're you know, short of time, but we do face, as I think it's clear, particular obstacles, the institutionalized racism, which some people try to deny the existence of, but which the very you know, the things that we're talking about in the fight for justice absolutely highlight and show how not only that it's there, but how blatant it is, and how deliberate the policies that governments come up with are there to do 2 things: one, to try and suppress that the movements, and 2, to try to divide other people from supporting us. And you know, I think Black Lives Matter movement, and you know, the movements for justice pretty much across the board in every field, whether it's the disability movement, whether it's the family courts movements, you know, we are coming together, recognizing that we have got a lot of common struggles, and that it actually doesn't matter if you've got papers or you know, the right to be here. What really matters is whether we're all going to get justice for the wrongs that have been done to us, which are the same, you know, and which it's clear, much clearer now, I think, than before, that we can come together on.
Absolutely. Like Martin Luther King used to say, just injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere, and everyone should be really aware of that. This kind of stuff is like cancer. It metastasizes, and after a while, even if you were privileged for some time, you will end up being crushed by the exact same system. Yeah, you mentioned the fact that women were indeed the main actors of this change in the detention process, which is a typical male way of dealing with things. You know, just detain and punish, and we'll see later if we figure out if some of those people are truly speaking the truth and truly victims. Yeah, because detention is like punishing the second time someone who has been so many times already. But yeah, it's a typical male way of dealing with things. And another thing is, it's also like this is revealing a strategy that has been deployed maybe more systematically in the last maybe 30 or 40 years is all these NGOs which have popped up, which with nice names and so on, but who actually do the state's job in continuing to crush all those people. But it makes it looks better when it's an NGO which tells you, oh no, by the way, we don't believe you and you're going to be, or oh no, you're a liar, you have not been raped and you will be prosecuted for false allegations. So yeah, it makes it all more acceptable for society, I guess. So is this a phenomenon, a new phenomenon that you have seen, all these new NGOs, or was it all the time?
I gave you a kind of a bit of a historical example. There's a much more current example in a way, which is that, and you're right, I mean, the NGOs are a physical layer, you know, that the government has put in. The government funds them. Their money comes from them. Therefore, they're dictated to by what their remits are. And that's something that WAR has never, ever done. You know, we've never accepted that money from the Home Office or the police. You know, that absolute independence is a total principle. We don't take that money. But the example I was going to give is something called voluntary returns. Now, the idea that there's such a thing as voluntary is it's disgusting. But it's a term that, and in fact, it's very interesting how they use language like that, as you said, to just make, put some sugar coating to the thing.
Marketing tactics.
Marketing tactics, exactly. So that is being really used to terrorize women into going back to the places that they fear for their lives. I mean, they see voluntary returns as a death sentence. If they wanted to go, they would have done it ages ago, because the system is so undeniably difficult to survive. And some women have been fighting for, getting on to 2-3 decades to regularize their right to be here. So they would have gone if that was an option. But having used that strategy, they then cut legal aid so that women can't possibly get, particularly if you're a rape survivor, you need expert evidence, a psychiatric report or country report to corroborate that that's the situation in your home country if you were to be returned to. So it's especially dangerous. They've also taken the state also attacks lawyers who take on cases to try to win at judicial review or to try to win precedent so that others, can benefit from winning something. And mothers are especially vulnerable to having their children taken off them because their poverty is then seen as neglect, whereas it's a deliberate poverty policy. So then they're faced with being deported without their children. And in fact, there have been some 103 families that has happened to, so that between the use of a system like voluntary returns and the use of the system of detention, that terror, is why so many women stay under the radar. They're told even by their own communities, don't mention that you've been raped, you won't be believed. Even the lawyers have told them, don't raise the rape, because that you won't be believed. So these battles are constant and ongoing. And just in the same way that we've got the Women Against Rape survival, Women Against Rape, Justice is Your Right self-help guide, there's a guide for asylum seekers, which Legal Action for Women put together based on the experiences of women in the All African Women's Group and the testimonies that were given and the examples and the experiences. That self-help guide is a blow-by-blow and a really good one on how to navigate the system and what to do if you are detained or if you are threatened with deportation. We've developed those over the years to include other tools because, of course, they change the laws and the regulations very frequently. And I mean, we're now up against an even more brutal system that Priti Patel is threatening to implement with her new immigration plan. So we have to be constantly, updating the evidence and the tactics and the changes in the law, so that people do know what their rights are. Because that is another tactic that the government uses against us, which is to make the laws so convoluted and ununderstandable, particularly if English is not your first language. They're not going to provide you with translation that is meaningful on anything. So, the barriers are immense, but the fight back is also, really organized in a lot of different ways, and is much bigger and broader now as a movement of resistance, as a movement supporting the resistance of asylum seekers than it's ever been. So it's clear that the government is always reacting to what we're doing as the grassroots movement on the ground, and that's the best we can do, isn't it? That's all we can do, is to, as the women of the mothers of the disappeared in Argentina said, the only struggle you lose is the one you give up.
Exactly, absolutely. And yeah, if I understand correctly, you not only have as a job, as a mission to protect women who have gone through terrible ordeals, but you also have to give them like self-defense guides against the tactics of the state, right?
Yeah.
In the next part.
It's very widespread amongst women who are seeking asylum, who may be or whose status actually depends on staying with a violent partner, because the partners all know that there's a hotline to the Home Office that they can just pick up and call when they're fed up, when they want to change the when they want somebody new,